I believe it would run immediately up against political as well as violent resistance on the part of, certainly on the part of the Palestinians and the Arab world.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Krasno Global Event Series. It is great to see that so many of you have joined us by Zoom today. Today, our guest is Ambassador David Litt, a distinguished former US diplomat. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador Litt. How are you doing today?
Good to be with you, Klaus. Thanks very much.
I will introduce Ambassador Litt to you in a minute. I'm Klaus Lares, and I'm the Richard M. Krasno Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs here at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I'm also a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Today, we are talking about the situation in the Middle East. As we all know, the Middle East has been a very unstable region for many decades. But the war in Gaza, the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria, the war in Lebanon, and the role of the Houthis and other dubious forces in Yemen and elsewhere have plummeted the region even deeper into crisis. I'm glad to have Ambassador David Litt here with us today to shed some light on the complicated situation in the Middle East. What are we to make of President Trump's idea to turn Gaza into a holiday resort and expel the Palestinian population for good? What is Israel's role in all that? And is Syria on the way to become a stable nation again? And what about the Arab states of the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia and others? Are they just sitting by passively? And of course, there are many other issues which we will need to discuss today. Let me introduce David Litt to you. David Litt served for 34 years as a career US diplomat, specializing in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. Ambassador Litt entered the Foreign Service in 1974. He served as the US ambassador to the United Arab Emirates from 1995 to 1998, and he was also consul general in Dubai before that. Ambassador Litt was political advisor to the US Central Command and US Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, from 1998 to 2004. And a few years later, he was a third-ranking officer at the US Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, with the title of Political Military Counselor, providing policy advice to the US ambassador and serving as liaison between the embassy and the multinational forces Iraq. While at the Department of State, Ambassador Litt served as a director of the Office of Northern Gulf Affairs, Iran and Iraq, and also as desk officer for Saudi Arabia. In addition to a tour as economic and commercial officer in Kabul, Afghanistan in the late 1970s, he served twice as political officer in Damascus, Syria. And other assignments included deputy chief of mission at the US Embassy in Nigeria and as a consular officer in Palermo, Italy. He also speaks multiple languages. But perhaps most importantly, Ambassador Litt received a bachelor's degree in history and French from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1971. No wonder he had such a distinguished diplomatic career. Ambassador Litt also earned a master's degree in international relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, and he attended a program for senior executives in national and international security at Harvard and Harvard's Kennedy School in the early 2000s. Thus, Ambassador Litt is exactly the right person to enlighten us about the complicated situation in the Middle East, not least in Gaza and Syria. Welcome, Ambassador Litt. It's great to have you here at the Krasno Global Events Series. And let me ask you straight away. We just heard a day or two ago that there will be a summit conference between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and it is supposed to take place in Saudi Arabia. Why is that summit supposed to take place in Saudi Arabia? Is Saudi Arabia doing anything as a mediator in the Ukraine war?
Good afternoon, Klaus. Thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to address the audience at the Krasno series. As for Saudi Arabia's role in any kind of intermediary or mediating position between Ukraine and Russia, I can't really address that because I don't know. I have seen similar reports that you have, but it would be consistent with what we have seen in the recent past about the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman's effort to have a much more prominent position on the world stage in a variety of different locations, to include issues involving Russia and perhaps Ukraine. Why President Trump or Putin would agree to hold a summit in Saudi Arabia, I don't know. It would be for the United States president very consistent with his, let's call it, mercurial approach to foreign policy making and foreign policy execution. I say that because in my day as a Foreign Service officer, many decades ago, we would never put the President of the United States out front in any kind of policy implementation or policy announcement, let alone implementation, without very careful, lengthy vetting across the national security architecture to make sure it was the right thing to do, that we will stand behind it, and there's no sense that the president would have to take something back or change his mind, or in that sense, I find it somewhat interesting that on an issue as important as this one, that we would jump out and just say, here's what we plan to do.
Thank you. It occurred to me that because Trump has these strange plans about Gaza, throwing all the Palestinians out and developing it as a holiday resort, essentially, he needs the agreement of the Arab states to do so. Do you think, having his summit with Putin and Saudi Arabia, that has something to do with that Gaza idea of his? Is there a connection?
I can't imagine that there would be a legitimate connection, a prepared connection among these two topics. Again, it seemed to me that the announcement of this plan for Gaza to remove Palestinians from their land because it is in such a frightful state and put them somewhere else, that falls in line with this "it's a good idea today" category. And it also fits very much in line with the president's history and his lens of viewing how do you deal with land. Well, you build on land, you develop land, and that's what he knows how to do. So what a great opportunity. I think rather than a planned out strategy, this is more a confluence of a couple of good ideas of the moment.
Thanks. Sometimes when President Trump comes up with some unusual ideas, to put it that way, he actually gets his way, and he actually can realize them, at least regarding some of them. How realistic is it for him to push through successfully his idea about the future of the Gaza Strip? And who gave that idea to him? Do you think it came to him personally, or are there advisors or other countries, perhaps Israel, who had that bright idea?
Who gave him the idea, I couldn't possibly say. It is not a new idea that it would be valuable to invest in Gaza and to rebuild Gaza as a place that is comfortable, nice to visit, a pleasant place to live for the Palestinian residents, for tourists, to develop it. These, I'm sure, are ideas that are decades old, or a couple of decades old. The possibility is there. It may be that some advisor resurrected this idea and put it in his ear. It is a feature of the President of the United States that he can and does get his way. That's our system. That's why we are the most powerful nation on earth. But as I said before, it is critical that the government, the executive branch of government, and Congress be fully prepared and coordinated in conceptualizing such a bold, broad, very perilous step to take, if not illegal and unlawful, as I have read in some places, to displace without their agreement or permission or approval the people of Gaza, the Palestinians of Gaza. After all, there is a long history of expulsions of Palestinians out of their land. It's not something you want to say is a good thing to do. It will not resonate at all very well with Palestinians. It definitely will not resonate with any of the neighboring Arab countries that have been proposed to be the recipients of the refugees, especially not neighbors Egypt and Jordan.
So would you say, based on your experiences, your long-standing experiences, that his idea is quite unrealistic, or is there a chance that he may actually be able to get away with it?
It is unrealistic. I think that that's probably the best way to put it. That doesn't mean that the United States, the executive branch of the United States, cannot muscle forward a set of steps that would try to implement this kind of idea. I believe it would run immediately up against political as well as violent resistance on the part of certainly on the part of the Palestinians and the Arab world. So how far you can muscle, it's much more arm wrestling is an indelicate metaphor, but essentially we're trying to coerce our way into a strategy, a resolution to the problem of the Palestinians in Gaza. That's not the way to approach things. It is much, much better to engage in negotiations, discussions with Palestinians and with their Arab neighbors and with Israel for the proper resolution that addresses the interests of all the people inside of the negotiation, not just one or two people.
Tell me,
parties, sorry.
Tell me, what about Israel? What is the situation in Israel today after the Gaza war? It has come to an end. What is Israel's plan for the future? How to deal with the Palestinians and how to deal with its own position in the Middle East?
I think part of the problem is that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu has never put forward a plan for what next. And I have read that as a result of President Trump's offer here, that the response from Israel, the Israeli government was, well, here's the what's next. You asked for it, well, here it is. As sort of throwing it over the transom and seeing if it works. So there remains the very desperate need for Israel, the state of Israel, and especially the Israeli government to come together with its adversaries as well as its friends, and with other members of the Abraham Accords, and with the United States and the European Union, and frankly, other players in the Middle East, to put together once and for all a solid solution to the question of the Palestinians, Palestine, and Israel. I personally believe that the two-state solution is really the only viable way for all parties to have their interests met.
You mentioned the Abraham Accords, and in many circles, the Abraham Accords, even in critical circles, are usually, or Trump is given a lot of credit for the Abraham Accord. Would you say that is correct? And what is the future of these accords? Will they be developed? Is that possible?
Well, yes, the administration of President Trump did create these Abraham Accords along with the partners that signed on to it. it has the potential. It really was a very important first step to bring together Arab leaders and countries that are leading the Arab world to create consensus that we need to stabilize and grow the Middle East along with Israel, potentially having Iran be brought in somehow, not as a spoiler, not as an outsider, but somehow to incorporate all of the players and the Palestinians into a new structure in the Middle East. It was only a first step, and it was through the leadership of the countries involved, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and potentially Saudi Arabia. But that leadership also has a citizenry behind them that will want to see progress along the lines of what the Arab states have already stated in terms of providing for an independent Palestinian state.
Thank you. You have thought deeply about the region and also the future of the region. What is your vision for the Middle East?
Well, the Middle East is a complex place, so there's no doubt about that. It is. I think we need to take a look at the basics of what we're talking about when it comes to the Middle East. It is a region that has a long history. I mean, long history. I think we could safely go back 4,000 years. And a lot of the various parts of the Middle East share common roots both in ancient times as well as in modern times, especially since the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. All of the various parts of the Middle East region were born out of that era of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It is also important to keep in our minds that this is not the Middle East, a single region, a country, if it will, in the same way that we don't think about Africa as a country. Africa as a continent, it's complex, it's huge. Same thing with the Middle East. And as we see today, as we speak, there are many crises, conflicts, violent conflicts going on in this region that we call the Middle East. And these conflicts are in fact interconnected, as we've already referred a little bit to. And this interconnectedness of the various regions that you suggested we might talk about is important, because any degradation or any political problems that arise in one area are very likely to affect another area in ways that we cannot predict or perhaps even influence very easily. Similarly, because these various parts of the Middle East are interconnected, it is also true that solutions in one area can and will affect the conflicts of another area, in the way that really good solutions, not like what we're seeing coming out of Gaza, but really good solutions can have good effects in those other parts of the Middle East. And conversely, bad solutions are more likely to have bad effects in the other parts of the Middle East. So that interconnectedness is something we absolutely must keep in mind if we're dealing with Iran or with Gaza or Syria or Turkey or the Kurds, whatever it may be. There are many ways to look at the Middle East. There are a variety of lenses such as Pan-Arabism, political Islam, the lens of the birth of the state of Israel. How has that affected the Middle East? The legacy of the colonial powers, especially the United Kingdom and France. Oil, the production and occupation of lands in order to produce oil. All of those are valid lenses through which to examine and analyze what's going on in the Middle East. For our purposes today, I think it's really important to choose a different lens. And for me, that lens is the search for legitimate governance. And when I say legitimate governance, really what I'm talking about, just from my own mental framework, is the relationship between the people, the land, and their government, sort of three parts of a triangle where the people have a very strong attachment to their land. The government has a role of protecting the land of which it is the governing authority. And that third leg of the triangle is something that I think we need to keep our eye on, and that is the relationship between the people and their government. That is finding a legitimate governance for each of these parts of the Middle East. That's the way I think it would be valuable to interpret what is going on. Why is there violence? What is the nature of the conflict? So for me, you can boil down and discuss in a productive way the search for legitimate governance of a people over their territory. So that's why I think it would be a nice framework, a nice lens to discuss Gaza, to discuss Syria and Lebanon, Turkey and the Kurds, Iran or Yemen for that matter. They all involve the search for legitimate governance.
I think American policymakers and policymakers from other countries should listen to you and to us today and learn from what you've just said. That makes all perfect sense. What I find striking is that when you look at Ukraine again and Russia, Trump wants to withdraw. He wants to get a deal as soon as possible and basically get rid of the problem. But with the Middle East, he wants to occupy. He wants to get involved even more deeply. How do you explain that?
I think that because it is a mercurial policy and not thought through, what are the second and third, what are the first order of consequences of this, never mind the second and third order consequences, were never thought through. The image perhaps the image in the president's mind is it's rubble. Let's get the people away, just like when I develop a part of Brooklyn, you clear away the people, you clear away the rubble, you build something, and then people can buy it and come back. I'm surprised that he said no, Palestinians will not be coming back to their own territory. That's never going to fly. But why he believes that kind of approach of involvement is appropriate, whereas that seems to be the reverse of his attitude toward Ukraine. I cannot explain that unless you see Ukraine and the solutions to Ukraine, not so much as I don't want to deal with that, but rather I can fix that. And all we have to do is a couple of things and it's done. We're done. We're finished. Let's move on to something else. Not that I don't like that problem. Mm-hmm. So it may be that, and the same thing with Gaza. Let's build something. We'll fix it. I can make it beautiful. Golf courses on the sea. What's the problem here?
How important is Middle Eastern oil for the United States still? Because the United States itself is the leading oil and gas exporter of the world these days, and has done successful fracking enterprises and produces that stuff quite in large amounts itself. Does it really need the Middle East in terms of economic resources?
This is not the way to pose the question, because the global oil market is fungible. It is global. What happens in one area affects what happens in the other area. There is a free market, relatively free market in prices. I mean, OPEC does try to affect prices and can have an impact on the price of of oil, and therefore the retail price of petroleum products, but a much or an equally large impact on the oil market is that of global demand. And global demand is not uniform. There is a huge amount of demand for oil coming out of China, coming out of India, so that if the United States is not buying Middle East oil, China is, India is, other countries are. And then there are micro aspects to the oil market that are also very important. Refining capacity. Just because you produce oil doesn't mean you have gasoline, because you have to refine that oil in order to get it to gasoline pumps. Well, who does the refining? There are also issues such as oil that is on the seas in ships, oil that is in pipelines, issues such as gas. Europe is now rethinking its approach to its supply of gas, having moved away from Russian gas, perhaps to find a way to import LNG, liquefied natural gas, which goes on a ship, not through a pipeline. It's an expensive process. It's a process that has its advantages and disadvantages. But these are various aspects of the oil market that have little to do with whether the United States imports X amount of barrels per day from the Middle East, which it doesn't.
Are you saying the US wants to stay involved in the Middle East because the oil in various ways is still of very great consequences for US politics?
What happens in the Middle East has an impact on oil prices, oil availability, oil supply, and oil demand globally. So yes, the United States should worry about the stability of the Middle East. In order to have a stable and secure economy, you need to have a stable and secure supply of oil around the world.
And that would explain.
I have to mention, this was the bargain between the United States and Saudi Arabia in the 1940s, between King Abdulaziz, the king of Saudi Arabia, and President Franklin Roosevelt.
Yes, that is what I wanted to say. So that is the reason of the largest reason why Trump feels close to Saudi Arabia, wants to humor Saudi Arabia, despite the recent scandals about the death and murder of Khashoggi and similar episodes in Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has been rejuvenated as a responsible statesman. Is that correct?
I suppose the correct answer is yes. Mohammed bin Salman and his government have implemented horrific policies, including the murder of Khashoggi, and how he has dealt with business elites in Saudi Arabia, certainly at the beginnings of his reign as the de facto ruler, as crown prince of the country. But he's also done some things that have won him praise and won him support, such as his attempts to try to liberalize, to some extent, the role of women in Saudi Arabia, and also to minimize and reduce the impact of the Al-Wahhab vibe, the Al-Wahhab influence in Saudi Arabia, which until recently has been very strong in projecting very conservative policies, social policies, to the detriment of specifically of women, but others in the kingdom. So I think he's done some good things, some bad things. The situation with Iran is also very important for all of the neighbors to consider. So it's complex.
There is constant talk about Iran. There are constant rumors in the American press that Trump and also other countries may be about, Israel, for example, may be about to launch an attack on the nuclear facilities in Iran. Do you think there's any possibility that that might happen? Because Iran is also supposed to be integrated via the Abraham Accords and its development. You can't have it both ways, can you?
I certainly think it's possible. It's possible that Israel has for a long time wanted to cut to the chase and to inflict severe and significant damage to Iran's nuclear production capabilities. That would be exceedingly difficult, but Israel believes that it could do that. I don't think it could eliminate now and forever Iran's nuclear capabilities, but Israel's been determined to do that. One can also view the statements of the Netanyahu government as warning Iran that not only is this still a tool that Israel can wield, it is a tool that Israel is perfectly prepared to wield if Iran does not take steps to back off of its current trajectory on producing nuclear materials and also eventually the ability to produce a weapon and then ultimately to be able to launch a weapon somehow. So there are several steps involved, but I think the Netanyahu government wants to convince Iran that it is very serious. Now, what will the government of Ayatollah Khamenei do? I can't say. They're not in a great economic state right now, or a security state, since all of its proxies have been decimated. Well, at least all but the Houthis, and the ability of Iran to effectively attack Israel or defend itself has been reduced. So, but the way to deal with this, I would say, is to take advantage of Iran's weakness, to bring it into some sort of a broad-based agreement and understanding in the Middle East. That will be very difficult to do because a lot of people don't want to see Iran in any way come out of this well. That's something that negotiators have to deal with.
Let me encourage our viewers to submit their questions in writing via the chat function of your Zoom screen. I will ask a few more questions and then we will turn to the Q&A from the audience. Considering that Iran is currently pretty weak, as you just said, would it not make sense for Israel to try to take out Iran or the Iranian clerical regime? After all, that is what Israel did regarding Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. At least they attempted it, and fairly successfully, I would say. Why not attempt the same scenario with Iran?
Well, because one thing is to decimate an adversary's military capability, and in doing so, creating enormous havoc and destruction all around that enemy. So yes, you can undermine your adversary's ability to conduct military operations, as Israel has successfully done with Hamas and with Hezbollah. But it's another thing to eliminate the reasons for that adversary being adversarial and aggressive toward you. That's what you want. You want to stop those aggressive tendencies. You don't want to just eliminate their ability to conduct kinetic military operations. Because as we see in Gaza, Hamas is by no means gone. Its military has been degraded. Hezbollah is by no means gone, especially if Lebanon cannot rise up out of the ashes, almost literally, to produce a new political structure, a new political architecture that strengthens the multi-factional, multi-confessional society, this mosaic, this beautiful mosaic of a society that Lebanon is, get out of the grip that Hezbollah used to have. This is the moment to do that, but you have to do that politically, not militarily. The same thing with Iran. If you think that just blowing them up is going to reduce the ability of Iran to threaten you, I think that's folly. The United States learned that 3 times in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Libya, that just bombing things does not make for political resurrection in the search for good governance, which is what they should be doing.
Wouldn't the solution be regime change in Iran? So get rid of the clerical regime, replace it with a less clerical regime, less fundamentalist regime, because we know the population of Iran is, particularly the young, overwhelmingly pro-Western. Wouldn't that change the situation dramatically?
It is a nice plan. It sounds it's a nice strategy to say, let's just change the regime and bring about something that we want to have.
Does that remind you of Iraq?
It reminds me of Iraq in spades. This is exactly, and the authorities that thought that they knew how to remove the old regime and how to put in a new regime got everything totally wrong. That's the problem with regime change. The best regime change comes from within, one way or another. Iran has had regime change several times. So the Iranians can and should deal with their future and their governance by themselves. I don't know Iran all that well. I am very confident that what you said about support for a pro-Western, progressive, modern, relatively secular country in Iran is probably the case in the major urban centers of Tehran, of Shiraz, Isfahan, etc. But I am equally sure that there is a strong support for a devout, faithful Iran that is proud of its Persian heritage, but doesn't want to emulate a corrupt West. I think that's a perfectly reasonable contrast among those, and they have to work that out inside of Iran. Nations around Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Oman, like India, can all help Iran to work this out in addition to the United States, Europe, United Kingdom, China. All of us have a role to play to help Iran find a proper way out into a new architecture in the Middle East that is appealing for all, is stable for all, is secure for all, and especially for global trade, global commerce, and the rights of the people of the region.
Thanks. And are you confident that the Trump administration has learned the lessons from Iraq and the invasion of Iraq and the attempted regime change there?
No, I hear bumper stickers. I hear emblems, but I don't see any evidence of thought out proposals. I think the Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, is a serious statesman. I think he knows where he wants to take and conduct foreign policy. I'm not sure he's able to do that. I just don't think that's the way things are done in the Trump administration. The leader of the administration is Donald Trump, and Donald Trump tells the agencies of government, sometimes the other branches of government, what is to be done. And so whether Secretary Rubio is the right man at the right time may be immaterial.
So far, Elon Musk hasn't really gotten that much involved in foreign policy. Do you expect that to be around the corner?
Everything is everything is on the table. And I wouldn't say that he has been avoiding foreign policy. Didn't he comment on the Alternative für Deutschland? Didn't he make comments about the British government? So and South Africa. So I can very easily see his using his social media platform as a way to spout off on foreign policy issues, which do have an impact. This is, as long as he holds a position of trust and authority in the eyes of the president, then it has influence and authority, and other nations are going to have to, they will have to react in some way and not just brush it off as some very rich businessman who has a social media platform.
Thank you. Talk to us about Syria. There was a revolution in Syria. Assad is gone. And now we have a new government, and no one really knows how stable it is, how secular it is, how Islamist it is, and how cooperative it will be. What is your assessment so far?
Well, I think there's a realization, from what I read, there is a realization among the people who are now currently in power in Syria that there needs to be a new political system arrangement in Syria that is inclusive, that does recognize the rights and the desires and the obligations and authorities of the various sectors of Syrian society. It is a mosaic of different religious sects, of ethnicities, has been that way for thousands of years, literally. Islam came to Syria relatively late in time. The Syrians were more Christians and Jews before they were ever Muslims or Arabs, for that matter. So it is a mosaic of people who, certainly when I was there in the 1980s, highly educated, highly sophisticated, very, very as cosmopolitan as people as you would find in any other part of the leadership of the Arab world, whether we're talking about Lebanon or Egypt or Jordan. They were leaders, but under the repressive thumb of an Alawite military government since 1970, and under a military government even before then. So this new governing authority right now has a very difficult task to accomplish. It first has to provide services to the Syrian people, the basic services that any government performs. It has to accept the Syrians who have been refugees, who are desirous of coming back to their country, and they're flowing in from Turkey, from Jordan, from Lebanon, because they want to return home. Syria is their home, as I mentioned before. This is the land of the Syrian people, and so the second task is to accommodate all of these refugees, and with these refugees come new demands, new desires for the kind of government it's going to have. What is that going to look like? Syria hasn't had the semblance of a parliamentary government since, for 100 years. So they would have to resurrect something like that. It's not going to have a monarchy. It is not going to have an Islamic government like as in Iran. So they have to work out, what is that government going to look like? Fortunately, they do benefit from help and help in good faith, I think, from the countries of the Gulf, very important. And from their neighbors, it's going to be very difficult because Lebanon has its own problems. Iraq has its own problems. Turkey has probably the most important influence of all, because Turkey has skin in the game, if you will. Turkey is the location of many hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million refugees, Syrian refugees, that Turkey wants them to go home. Turkey is also concerned about the influence of infection of Kurdish terrorism and Kurdish terrorist groups into Syria, into the Syrian north. And the Turks are not sitting back waiting for something to happen. They are making sure that that Syria will not be the proving ground for new Kurdish opposition, violent opposition to Turkey or to Syria or anybody else. And my experience was, and this is again a long time ago, is that Syrian Kurds were not like Iraqi Kurds or Turkish Kurds or Iranian Kurds for that matter. The Syrian Kurds very much wanted to integrate into Syrian society, but they wanted their own schools, they wanted to be able to teach their own language, they wanted some recognition that they were in fact Syrians in good standing. So that's really what the Turks have to manage that portfolio. So it's going to be extremely complex, but with a lot of goodwill from the neighbors, the farther neighbors, even Iran and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, who are not immediate neighbors. And then the greater powers of the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, the Russians have to be involved in this as well. They can't be stiff-armed out because that will be counterproductive. They need to be brought into the tent, as well as the Chinese, who could potentially have a positive role to play in all of this. So
Thank you. Let me
ask a dynamic situation.
Let me ask you two more questions before we open it up. One refers to China. China is afraid that the collapse of Syria may lead to a rise of terrorism, which then spreads into China. Do you think this is realistic? And secondly, let's talk a bit more about Turkey. After all, a NATO member, after all, a Western ally. And Turkey sets itself up as a mediator in the Ukraine war, has done so in the recent past, but is of course also highly important regarding its near abroad, which is the wider Middle East. So what is Turkey? Is Turkey an up-and-coming big power, or is it really really going beyond its actual weight in world politics?
With respect to China and its concern about the rise of Islamic terrorism, China very much is concerned about the rise of Islamic terrorism that it perceives in its western provinces in Xinjiang from the Uyghurs, and there's a lot of hyperbole and overblown reaction to that. But China is concerned, and China views the release of the Islamic groups that were holed up in northwestern Syria as a potential spread once again of the threats from the Islamic State, from Al-Qaeda and others. I saw a news report the other day of the Islamic State somehow getting involved in burying inside of Somalia. That's what terrorist groups do, is to find ungoverned spaces that they can hide out in, just as Al-Qaeda did in Yemen, in the central part of Yemen after the Arab Spring, as the Islamic State did and still does today in Africa. So China understands the dynamic of the resilience of Islamic-based violent extremism, that it can enjoy a resurgence if it is not contained and eliminated to the extent possible. Forever, I think, is difficult, because there will always be There will always be puritanical groups who believe in a fundamentalist approach toward Islam, but to eliminate their role as a political significant political power and certainly a violent extremist power, then I think China is right on that score.
And regarding Turkey?
Turkey has played a very, let's call it an incongruous role over the last, let's say, 30 years or so. A NATO ally from the get-go, but today is trying to, not today, but in the last couple of decades, has tried to steer a more independent course in the various divisions that there are, whether it's in the Middle East or between Russia and NATO and the European Union, which it very much wanted to join. I don't know what the state of that interest is anymore, but certainly I don't think there's any closer to that goal. So Turkey has been trying to weave itself with a relatively Islamist government, trying to be both a fervent Islamic government, but also a secular economic power in the region. It's trying to find its own way, I think is the best way to put it. And when it comes to its own interests, it will fight tooth and nail, if you will, to make sure it protects its interest, especially when it comes to Kurdish terrorism and what they perceive as a threat to Turkey.
Thank you. I think we can all say that the prospects for Turkish EU membership are kind of dead. Neither the EU wants it, and Turkey itself has also repeatedly said they're not interested anymore. We can all be surprised. We never know what the future will bring, but I think at the moment it really looks very the prospects of Turkish EU membership are not there. But let's ask our Krasno assistants to come up with some of the questions and read them out aloud. Maybe we'll start with Katie. Did you see any interesting questions?
Yes, quite a few. So the first question comes from Pasuth, who asks, amidst the gutting of federal departments and agencies, do you think the Foreign Service will remain untouched, or will their career Foreign Service officers too face similar fates as their colleagues in USAID and other civil servants? Will we still see career Foreign Service officers appointed as ambassadors?
I believe that the Foreign Service will not remain untouched from the chaos that's going on in our federal workforce. And especially if you look at USAID and the penalties that career aid officers are having to pay through absolutely no fault of their own, the slander of that is foisted upon them is reprehensible. Foreign Service officers, I hope, will be protected to the extent that Secretary Rubio can do that. How far he will go, I don't know, but we cannot expect that this this bulldozer that's attacking the civil service and the civilian part of our government is going to be stopped anytime soon. I do believe that career Foreign Service officers should stick it out as much as they can, realizing that their livelihoods are at stake and their own sense of what is morally and ethically right. That's a difficult decision for individuals to make. I don't believe this will go on forever, and we will need a Foreign Service. We will need a career Foreign Service. We will need an experienced career Foreign Service on into the future. And once you remove, eliminate, expel career professionals who have 10, 20, 30 years of experience under their belt, that's very hard to replace in any reasonable amount of time. That's what's happening to USAID, unfortunately. I believe that career Foreign Service officers will continue to be appointed as ambassadors, nominated as ambassadors. I believe that the Trump administration will hold to its previous record of appointing no more than 50% of our ambassadorships going to career Foreign Service officers. The traditional ratio is about 2/3 of our ambassadors are career Foreign Service officers, and roughly 1/3 are political appointees. Not all political appointees are necessarily bad or undesirable. There have been some great political appointees serving as ambassadors of the United States, but just not so many.
Thank you. Sivan, do you have a question too?
Yes, I do. So this is from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, Ambassador, what you see as the role of the UN to mediate in the Middle East, promoting peacekeeping and security for all people, and promote cooperation among Middle Eastern nations.
This is a difficult situation because the United Nations does not have a sterling reputation among the players in the Middle East, and for good reason, because for one thing, the United Nations works on the basis of consensus for the most part in terms of making decisions. So it takes a long time for the United Nations to make decisions. Once it does, those decisions are on the basis of consensus, sometimes unanimity, and therefore they have a strong moral force in international law. But it's hard to get there. In terms of United Nations agencies and programs, also do not earn a great reputation for a variety of reasons. Some of them are very bureaucratic. Some of them waste a lot of money if you really went into auditing these things. Some are hampered from doing their job. And so they get a rap for not being able to do their job because some country is stopping them from doing it. So it's going to be, I would say, not advisable to try to rely on the United Nations as the central implementer of a stable peace in the Middle East. However, the United Nations can play a very important role in the Middle East in terms of helping to implement and helping to organize all the various donors, whether from the private sector, NGOs, bilateral assistance from various governments, to coordinate effectively all the help that has to go into the Middle East. And the United Nations is very good at doing that, especially the World Food Program, which is, aside from its main job in terms of providing food, also is the head of the logistics cluster for the United Nations and is the main vehicle for organizing all of the logistics that has to be done in order to carry out various processes. So we will need the United Nations. They just won't be the main character in this play.
Thank you. Katie. Do we have another question?
We do. For some reason, my video is not working.
Well, just ask.
But I'm happy to. Oh, there we go. Okay, there. So Dave Sitter asks, what would be the impact if the Israeli government successfully annexes the West Bank and Gaza?
Successfully is a word that that doesn't fit in that sentence. Israel can move to annex the West Bank and Gaza. But what they will find is millions in a resident population that are opposed to that to that annexation. And they will find a withering set of friends and alliances that frankly, the United States and other nations have helped to build over the years will just evaporate. And Israel will find itself as a pariah state for taking over land that does not belong to them. This has been a notion of international law and nation-state practice, certainly since the end of World War II and the creation of the United Nations. And it is also the foundation of world opposition to Russia's move into Ukraine. You just don't take over and annex somebody else's land. So Israel may think that this is a feel-good thing to do, but it does not have either the authority, or the ultimate benefit from just taking over somebody else's land because you think it belongs to you, and you can make a case that this is our land, those people will be damned. And many times analysts have pointed out that Israel would lose its democratic nature by occupying another population against its will.
Thank you. How do you see the future of Israel? There has been a lot of resentment, to put it mildly, about the brutal procedure of Israel in Gaza, overlooking, the casualties among civilians above all. And that has led to a lot of resentment around the world, of course, including in the Middle East. And Israel has always had a certain position in the world because of the Holocaust, and deservedly a position, it was terrible. But now Israel is doing things no country should really do. How will that affect Israel's future standing, both in the Middle East and abroad, so to speak, outside the Middle East? Will Israel continue to exist?
If Israel decides that it wants to continue a policy of revenge and returning an eye for an eye as a strategy, we will be caught in this loop forever. Israel has conducted some horrific things, but Israel is not alone in the Middle East in extreme violence. Extreme violence has been a feature of this region certainly since the end of World War II and of course in the interwar period as well. So it is useless for me, in my mind, as a policy analysis to start, well, who's worse? Who did more worse things than the other? And because we'll just be caught up in that argument. We need to get out of that, but move forward into a positive framework where peace, security, stability, independence is the name of the game. We were almost there, I would argue, in the early 1990s, leading up to the Oslo Accords and beyond. There was a lot of positive feelings about the potential, the opportunities for a renewal of the Middle East. We were also there in the recent past, in the lead up to the Abraham Accords and the creation of the Abraham Accords, and everything was possible until October 7th of last year. And then that all fell apart deliberately because Hamas did not want to see that kind of new architecture. Hamas wanted to continue the policy of grievance, the strategy of grievance and retaliation. That is in Hamas's favor. And Israel fell into the trap, I'm afraid, of responding to that grievance and then continuing to respond and continuing to respond and continuing to respond. It's one thing to deal with grievance, but then you have to move on to build on that strategy. Given the I would say inordinate support that Israel enjoyed in the days following that horrific attack on Israel, to build on that so that Israel becomes not only the legitimate player in the Middle East that it is, but recognized so among its Arab neighbors and others, and then builds a Middle East where the countries of the Middle East trade with each other. That is not the case in the last decade or more. Arab states did not trade with each other. So we need a new architecture. Israel needs to get out of this revenge and retaliation mindset and annexation and takeover mindset, and into one of a positive creation of a new architecture in the Middle East.
It sounds pretty good to me, but somehow it also seems to be a little bit of wishful thinking.
Very much wishful thinking, unless people put their minds to it. I can't, beyond that, but there are people in the Middle East who can. And I believe that that Mohammed bin Zayed in the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Salman, I think the new ruler of Oman, certainly King Abdullah, are all trying to find ways to be creative in this new endeavor, and to be forward-leaning, a little bit of risk-taking, and that's what it's going to require, is leadership that people can follow, and leadership that especially their own people can follow. So it's not going to happen without individual players. And another one that's been mentioned for a while, I mean, we haven't talked about the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. They need to change their architecture as well. Another name that has been mentioned a long time is Salam Fayyad, who lives in the United States. He was a wonderful prime minister and finance minister for the Palestinian Authority, and then left. I can't recall the circumstances. I'm sure there were legitimate ones, but he enjoyed the support, reputation of many players in the Middle East, including in Israel. That's where we need to get to again.
Or do we need a new government in Israel as well? Or do you see that architecture being erected with Netanyahu being still the most prominent player in Israel?
Unlike Iran and Saudi Arabia, for that matter, that decision is in the hands of the Israeli people, and they can determine what kind of future and present they want to have. And Israel has, along with Italy, has been one of the stablest, unstable countries in the world, with constant turnover of political coalitions with all these political parties, but that represents the kind of parliamentary democracy that Israel is. So the Israeli people have that in their power. I have not seen any indication that the prime minister intends to shift course and change direction in what I would consider a positive direction, but rather, when we talk about occupying Gaza and occupying the West Bank and bombing Iran, that's not in the right direction in my book.
Thank you. Sivan, do you have another question?
Yes, we do. This one is from Stuart Kaplan, who asks what the intent was behind involving Mohammed bin Salman in the negotiations between Trump and Putin, and if that potentially reflects Trump's plans for Gaza.
Well, I don't really know is the short answer, but I think that Mohammed bin Salman has wanted to boost the reputation of Saudi Arabia as an active player and a muscular player in the politics of the Middle East, as well as the rest of the world, and wants to be recognized as such, perhaps in the same way that Egypt used to be in the days of Nasser and Sadat. or India still is a major player on the world stage. So, and he wants to elevate his role, and perhaps the United States and Russia have given him this opportunity. I don't know who suggested this first. I can't say. What impact it may have on Gaza, I don't know. But I can say that Mohammed bin Salman would never, I believe, would never want to abandon the Palestinian people in that way under this kind of project to expel Palestinians, to go somewhere and to rebuild some kind of development project with fancy hotels and golf courses and beach resorts and the like. I cannot believe that Mohammed bin Salman would fall for that. So there may be an element of a deal here, and I hope part of that deal is a proper proper conclusion of this horrid Gaza story, not just, well, get off of this development project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Katie, do we have another question?
We do. This one is also from Pasuth, who asks, given your experience in the Gulf with its many sovereign wealth funds, what is your assessment of Trump's proposal for the United States to establish one?
I don't know. I've heard that. I don't know that much about sovereign wealth funds, except for countries that are wealthy beyond what their own size and normal and population base and normal resources would allow, when they have extraordinary wealth and excess reserves. That's a good use of that money. Norway, for example, is a good use of excess resources for the benefit of the earth, of the world. Now, for the United States, we are not in such good financial state, especially if we have a new budget that results in even deeper deficits for the United States. So I'm not an economist, but I don't think a sovereign wealth fund under those conditions would be valuable for the United States. And at this point, I definitely do not trust the administration to administer a sovereign wealth fund in ways that the United States can be proud of.
Thank you. There's a question from Oliver Stelling from Melbourne in Australia. And he asked about the role of the United Arab Emirates. You were ambassador to the UAE. So tell us about the role of the UAE in peace mediation in the Middle East, and also as a hub of attracting foreigners, of attracting international businesses to the Gulf and also to the wider Middle East.
Well, I can say more about the latter than I can about its role in peace negotiations. You have to keep in mind that the United Arab Emirates, specifically Dubai, throughout the early 20th century and into the mid 20th century, was a very powerful, relatively wealthy economic commercial base for the region. It did not have oil. It had a reputation for a place where you could do business regardless of your ethnicity or your religion or whatever, as long as you paid a customs fee to the government and didn't make trouble. You came to the United Arab Emirates. You came to Dubai in particular, and the Dubai authorities made its emirate an attractive place for foreigners to come then to live and to work and to do business. And they made sure that in this very isolated part of the globe, in the Arabian Peninsula with sand and all, that the quality of life, healthcare, education for children, and I'm talking about in the 20s and 30s, that would be maintained. And the workers came and they stayed, and investment came. The same thing after Iran the Shah of Iran fell and corporations wanted to leave the Gulf, the ruler of Dubai said, no, wait, please stay here. You can do business here. You will be safe here. And in fact, they were, and they did. And Dubai built up infrastructure to attract investment, to attract people to come and live and work and play in Dubai, whether we're talking about civil aviation, commercial maritime, hotels, the international telecommunications. What the UAE has been able to do is to leverage its intellectual, technological expertise by a highly educated population base to go beyond its wealth in oil and gas to attract an international following and continuing international investment in high-tech areas beyond what any other country that is more risk averse would be willing to take. So the United Arab Emirates is proving itself to be a beacon to attract business and investment to the UAE, and for good reason. And it does produce things tangibly for those who come. I think Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Rashid in Dubai are also trying to leverage that solid reputation to present itself as a potential mediator or a potential player as an intermediary in various negotiations. They are in contact with the Iranians, as are the Saudis. So they don't get too far afield in being too aggressive or retaliatory, but rather move somewhere toward more cooperation. The Emirate of Fujairah of the UAE on the east coast, the Indian Ocean coast, is a boom town for exports and for imports into the Gulf because of its very favorable geographic location. And the same is true for, I'm sure, for other emirates. I haven't visited them recently, but I was in Fujairah just recently. So it is the UAE, I believe, are playing their cards right. It's not perfect. No country is perfect. They make their mistakes as well. But I think in the aggregate, as the questioner has asked, they are doing right by the region.
But the human rights situation in the UAE is not that good, to put it politely. And I understand the UAE is also meddling in the affairs of other governments and countries in not always a very benign way. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And I would also say that the country that does not have a human rights problem, I'd like them to step forward. And the country that does not meddle in other countries, I'd like them to step forward as well to begin a discussion of what the right way to comport yourselves as an international player. It is true that the United Arab Emirates involved itself, I would argue, excessively and counterproductively in the Yemeni civil war. I would say that the UAE was not helpful in its involvement in Libya's civil war. And there are other examples as well, but the UAE, like other countries, are looking after their own interests, much of which have to do with Iran as their primary adversary and Islamic violent extremist as an equal adversary as well. And they will do everything to make sure that that does not spread. We've gone to such great lengths to keep it bottled up for now. They don't want that to expand.
Sivan, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. This question refers to what you think will happen with regard to the Trump administration potentially levering Jordan to accept Gazan refugees.
I felt very much pain for King Abdullah in the situation that he was put in in the Oval Office during that press availability. It is inconceivable. King Abdullah is in a very difficult position. Jordan is in a very difficult position, and has been for many, many decades because of the huge Palestinian refugee population, most of whom are now Jordanian citizens, side by side with a native Jordanian, what we call East Bankers, that is, those Jordanians who lived in Transjordan, the East Bank of the Jordan River, before 1947, 1948, and the Jordan, the king in particular, has had to play a very deft role into making sure that he has a stable society, that are not at daggers drawn of one or the other. And so the concept that you're going to have this massive influx of, again, of Palestinians after 1948, after 1967, after 1973, that this is not going to happen, especially in any deliberate sense. So it was unconscionable in my view to lay that out, to make King Abdullah a strong ally for so many decades, to have to face that situation. That really was undiplomatic and uncalled for. Now, it just shows the difficulty that the Trump administration would have. I hope it gets off of this project. It's ridiculous. In getting Palestinians, forcing Palestinians, pushing them out into the arms of some other unwilling country like Egypt, who has the same problem because it also has a significant number of Palestinian refugees and also suffers from the threat of Islamic terrorism.
Thank you. We have time for 7 minutes or so for 2 questions, maybe 3 at the most. And I would like to thank David Litt already for his precise answers and for putting all the energy into answering all our questions. Katie.
Thank you. So this one comes from an anonymous attendee. They're also asking about recent actions taken by the Trump administration in the Middle East. And they ask, do you believe it is possible for the next administration to reverse the damage caused to U.S.-Middle East relations?
Is it possible for the U.S. to reverse the damage caused to U.S.-Middle East relations? Is that right?
Yes.
Absolutely possible. It will require a change of strategy. It will require a change of approach in the diplomacy that we carry out in the Middle East. We have a lot of capable officers who know about working in the Middle East, who know how to deal with countries who have adversarial relationships, and yet we know how to build upon common interests that they have. We know how to do this. We know, and we can do it in their own language. But it requires a skilled career diplomatic corps that respects the policies of the administration. And if the policies of the administration are designed to work toward security, peace, and stability for all players, not just for a couple of players, well, then absolutely we can improve America's relations. There is still a well of good feeling toward the United States. It is rapidly being squandered, especially in the younger populations of the Middle East, and that includes in our policies toward USAID. It is unfathomable for the recipients of aid projects that the United States has suddenly pulled the plug on them, reversing years of good feeling and goodwill that has earned the United States, not to mention the actual benefits to those populations. We can change this, but it requires a change in strategy.
You expect to see that?
No, I don't. I don't see any evidence of that.
Sivan, please.
So this question pivots a little bit. It's asked by an anonymous attendee who has remarked that you clearly have been very successful in your diplomatic career. If you had any advice for any future individuals seeking this kind of job prospect, what would it be?
Number one is to contact your the diplomat on campus in the region where you live. And all you have to do is go to the website careers.state.gov, and there's a tab that says, I think it's diplomats on campus, and contact that person. They can give you all the updated current information about the Foreign Service. It is still a great career. It will be a great career into the future. It always has its ups and downs, but it is a career that's not for everybody. It is for people who are comfortable in living in and understanding other cultures, working with other people from other cultures, potentially speaking a foreign language, because all Foreign Service officers will learn a foreign language if you don't have one. It is also a career that is imbued with change. There is constant change over the course of a 25, 27-year career, whether you're changing countries, you're changing the actual work you do, even though it's within your same career track, let's say economics. Economic work in Brazil is completely different from economic work in Ghana. And so this concept of constant change is a feature of the Foreign Service. It's scary for some people, but it's really attractive for others. You also have to understand how to live in hardship. We're not in the United States. We live in difficult societies where there may be crime, there may be diseases, there may be violence. But Foreign Service officers often just relish that kind of lifestyle, and their families too. We are all there together, living in societies overseas. I highly recommend the Foreign Service. At least try it out. Check that website, careers.state.gov.
Thank you, David. I think these were very good concluding words. You have given some good advice to future Foreign Service officers, to young people who are thinking about entering that career. Now, perhaps your final words to our current policymakers. How can we save the American position in the Middle East and its reputation? And how, even more important, can we get the Middle East out of the current chaos, difficulties, war situation?
I think the most important thing that realistically can happen now, I don't expect much out of the Trump administration. I think their direction is clear. I think their intentions are clear, is for the Congress of the United States, Republicans and Democrats, to play the role that they were hired to play in terms of the formulation and the funding of American foreign policy, to stand up for those values and those norms and that reputation and moral authority that America can and should carry around the world, that Republicans and Democrats have always supported. And I hope they will continue to do that. When people around the world see that the United States is truly a nation of three branches of government, they'll have an executive that does this, that, or the other, but then they have a Congress that helps to stabilize that, and ultimately a court system that will honor the rule of law, then America's reputation will be preserved, even going through very rough waters. The Congress must stand up. And I talk to all of those, especially in the majority party in the Senate and the House, to play your role, your role as the first branch of government, the legislative branch of government, and take your authority seriously.
Ambassador David Litt, thank you very much for your good advice and for your many insights into the complicated and complex situation in the Middle East, and of course America's role there, and what to do and what not to do, perhaps even more importantly. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. I would also like to thank all our viewers. to join us. Many have here stayed with us to the bitter end. And I would like to tell you that that the video of our conversation tonight will be soon on our YouTube channel, our famous YouTube channel, where you can watch the conversation all over again. And of course, all our many other Krasno events. And the next Krasno event will be in less than 2 weeks already. And I will announce it soon and market it properly, of course. And if you're not yet on my mailing list, then please send me an email and I will happily put you on the Krasno events mailing list. As you know, it is worthwhile being on that mailing list because we have so many exciting events. And of course, people like David Litt, they make what the Krasno event series is all about. They give us new insights, they enlighten us, and we know an awful lot more about international affairs after having watched our Krasno events. Ambassador David Litt, thank you very much again, and thank you. Thanks to everyone else as well. See you again soon. Bye-bye.